So, well, maybe you could tell me a bit about, the initial trip. It's some years ago, right?
Yeah, it was in 2021.
Okay. And what was the context?
So basically what happened is I was raised Mormon, and I had heard that there were psychedelic studies that were showing that they were really good for like anxiety. And everything that I had been hearing, it was just the very mainstream sort of Western scientific approach to psychedelics, which was very like it was very positive. It was like alarmingly positive, right? It's just like these are really good for your neural pathways and they can help, cure depression. And it was like podcast after podcast or documentaries or articles that I was reading that I was just like, oh, this sounds amazing. It was just very, very positive.
Mm.
And so and I had been struggling with that ever since I gave birth to my twins. It was kind of like a postpartum thing that just like never ended.
Struggling with
And
anxiety.
yeah, like anxiety and some depression off and on.
Hmm.
So I found a woman online. I just like Googled and she was on a website. I Googled like trip sitter or like somebody who could, I wanted to approach it from like a spiritual perspective because I was still Mormon at the time,
Hmm.
and so I was
Yeah.
like, approaching it that way. I was like a very religious person. And she was just like one of the first people that I found online, but she had a lot of really good reviews. And I went to her and it was kind of like, the very first experience I had with her was essentially where I realized that Mormonism is a cult. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
A little bit, yeah.
So it was kind of like I did those psychedelics, and then very shortly thereafter, I was like, oh, I am in a cult, and everything kind of started to unravel very quickly, which was very helpful in the long run, but was very shocking and very traumatic and not what I was expecting. And then from there, her and I kind of stayed in contact, and it was almost as if she had been learning these medicines herself. And as she was learning them, she was like, oh, do you want to try this? Oh, do you want to try this? And I didn't know any better. I didn't know any different. And so I was just like, sure. And I was kind of riding this like psychedelic high, where it's like, wow, these are so
Hmm.
amazing. And yeah, nobody was really telling me to slow down. And
How
and
old, how old is the guide?
she's probably, I want to say around 50, maybe.
50, okay. Is she a therapist?
She's not a therapist. She works underground. Um, and I don't know anything really about how much training she's had. All I know is that it was kind of like she was experimenting with me, and I was just like, sure, and eventually she got to the point where this was after doing mushrooms with her and combo and bufo. And I will say that she did do like medical intake with me, which was good. And she dosed me very low, aside from the combo, which was very high. But the bufo and the mushroom, she dosed me very low, which was good. But she eventually referred me to someone else because she was too busy or whatever. And I went to do a ceremony with this other woman who did no intake, um, and dosed me way too high,
Did no intake as in no screening?
no screening.
Really? No, I didn't ask you anything about you.
It was like it was very informal, like I don't even remember if she asked me if I was on any medications. That might have been the extent of it.
Right.
She's not a therapist. There's a lot of like Utah has kind of a weird psychedelic scene where there's a lot of people who leave Mormonism and then they're just like, I'm a shaman, and they kind
Right.
of go to like the new age cult,
Right.
which is very like like they're talking, I don't know if you know much about it, but it's like they're talking about star seeds and they're talking about like ascending to 5D, and like it's just very bizarre. So that's kind of how she was. She was more of like a one of these people that like talks in light language, and she, she's like
Okay.
doing palm readings and stuff.
Right.
But for me, just leaving Mormonism, I mean, I just wasn't educated enough about the red flags.
And what did she give you?
She gave me mushrooms, and while I was on mushrooms, she gave me ayahuasca.
Oh,
Yeah, so she
did,
mixed the two together.
okay. And did you know that was what was going to happen?
She talked about it before, but we didn't decide on anything. She was like, I also have ayahuasca. Some people like to do the mushrooms and the ayahuasca together. And I was like, I don't know. Like, I think I'm just going to do the mushrooms. I don't know how, you know. And then once I was on the mushrooms, she asked me again if I wanted the ayahuasca. And I said yes,
Okay.
which at the time, I'm like, you know, how much can you really consent to something when you're,
Sure.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you're on a psychedelic.
Yeah.
So she gave me ayahuasca, and the trip itself wasn't really a bad experience per se. It was a lot of like, you know, just very, it was mostly really nice.
Mm,
But I was definitely very far gone.
mm,
Like I had no awareness of my surroundings. I was like, if I, you know, peed my pants, I would have no idea. You know, I was completely gone. And then it was afterwards that I came back. I couldn't like I couldn't come back. I couldn't like come back to my body. And it was probably 2 weeks or so where I couldn't like form coherent thoughts. And I felt like I was not quite in my body, almost like I was watching myself. And it was like I was there, but I wasn't there.
mm.
And I kept just like feeling things and being like, is this real? You know, like, is this ground real? Is this body real? And I texted the woman and I asked her, you know, what's happening to me? And she was basically like, oh, you're stuck in the astral plane.
Okay.
That was her integration.
Uh-huh.
And from there, it was maybe I kind of like things calmed down a little bit. And then a short while later, I had like my very first panic attack. And that's when everything kind of hit the fan. It was almost like the experience, I kind of like pushed it down into my body, you know, the psychedelic experience. I kind of like got it under control enough that I was like, okay, I'm okay. And then
Mm,
I had a panic attack, and it was like I couldn't recover after that.
right.
Am I
Was
talking too much?
no. Was
Okay.
the trip itself frightening? You said the trip itself was you were just very out of it.
Yeah, I mean, there was a part at the beginning, and it's just like, I just want you to know that I'm so aware of how many red flags there are now, but I had no idea at the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Um, Especially coming from Mormonism. Like, it's literally like you're a child who's like going to psychedelics. It's insane.
Right.
Um, but there was a part at the beginning where she gave me, I think it was like 2.5 grams, which isn't really a ton, but it was way too much for my system, especially after doing all of those other psychedelics earlier in the year, you know?
Mm,
And I started throwing up
mm,
because it was like I think my system was just like no. And I don't remember much about the beginning. I remember feeling like blackness and like I don't know how to describe it. Like it felt very incoherent and very dark and very like demonic, or I don't know how you would describe it. It just felt like the beginning of a really bad trip. And I don't remember like I just remember sitting on the grass and just feeling like I was in some sort of like hell. I like couldn't talk, I couldn't form sentences, I couldn't think straight. And then before I knew it, she had this like book of prayers, and
mm,
she was like doing like Jesus prayers.
mm,
She was like casting out demons.
mm,
Oh my God. So bad.
mm.
And I don't know if I mean, I guess her Jesus prayers worked. I don't know what happened, but from there, it kind of like things kind of calmed down, and from there, it was good. But
All
there
right.
is a lot of it that I don't necessarily really remember, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So after the panic attack, then what happened? How did that play out? And that was like a couple of weeks later, you said?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. So once that happened, it was like that's when the very classic sort of like spiritual emergency symptoms all began. It was like I a lot of it was very somatic for me, which when I found your website and you had that whole page that was just about like the somatic symptoms that people can have, it was like, oh, I had never felt more seen, because that's how it was for me. It was just like, it felt like my body changed.
Mm,
And I kept thinking I was having like a medical emergency, because I was like, what's my body doing? It was doing so much weird stuff. And I was having like 6 or 7 panic attacks a week. And it was just like one thing after another. I don't even know how to describe it. I don't even know how to describe it. It just felt like my body was in somatic chaos.
I mean that,
And
and that led to things like inflammation, but weak immune system, weight loss, maybe
yeah, so
autoimmune things or stomach stuff or
yep, yep. So it kind of started out with the just the panic attacks and me like making trips to the ER because my heart was like palpitating so bad. I was having all these chest pains. But like this process has lasted, I mean, it's been 4 years now, and I'm still, it's not like I feel like I've gone back to how I was before. It's been a slow process of like doing one test after another at the doctor to just like see what's wrong with me and see what's going on. And it's like long term, having that much stress in my nervous system, it's like developed like long term issues, right? Where it's like, yeah, weakened immune system, or I have really, my gut is all out of balance. I lost like 40 pounds. Um, I was like 96 pounds at one point. I couldn't eat. I started having functional seizures, which is like a seizure that comes from too much stress.
yeah.
And I was having night terrors, like really bad night terrors where I'd be waking up and running to the bathroom to throw up. Um, I was very sensory overwhelm, a lot of
Hmm.
sensory. Couldn't go out of in public. There was a while where I had to live at my parents' house. I had to have my ex-husband move back in with me for a minute. I thought I was going to die. I mean, I spent a solid 6 months thinking I was going to die every single day. Um,
Of what?
sorry.
Of what? Like, because
I
your
mean,
body was so weakened.
yeah. I mean, it was more like my body. Like, have you ever read any of Stan Groff's books?
Yeah, just spiritual emergencies one, and then
Yeah.
bits and bobs of the others.
Yeah, so he has one called The Way, or he has The Way of the Psychonaut. And in there, he talks about how sometimes the physical body can confuse like an ego death with an actual death. And it's like you get stuck in this loop where it's like some part of you thinks that you're dying,
Yeah,
literally, but you're not actually.
yeah,
Yeah, and so that's what it was like for me, where it was like I was having a lot of somatic symptoms, which but it was being fueled by this sort of unconscious thing in me that was like, oh, we're dying, we're dying. And so it was like my nervous system was constantly like preparing for death. I
yeah,
don't know if that makes sense.
yeah. It makes total sense. Yeah, I think I hadn't heard that from Stan Groff before, but that makes a lot of sense to people who come to the NGO and to the peer group. It's like at some subconscious level, they're stuck in a holy shit kind of response, like, you know, they're in an existential threat, and
Yes.
their whole body and nervous system is geared as if, you know, in a
Yeah.
complete defense, fight or flight kind of thing, which
Yeah,
is
like they're preparing for annihilation.
yeah, which is just so tough on the physical system.
Yes. Yeah, I mean that's what's caused all my issues is because I haven't been able to get my nervous system regulated.
Mm,
And, I coupled that on top of the fact that I left Mormonism at the same time.
mm,
And, when I read, I think this is why it's lasted so long for me, because when I read people's stories like this, where they have these traumatic experiences and it's like, oh, it resolves in like a year or maybe 2 years or whatever,
mm,
it's because they have something to come back to,
mm,
where it's maybe, uh, it could be anything. Like it could be a relationship that feels safe. It could be a hobby a passion that they love. It could be even just like exercising or like finding safety in their body or in nature or whatever. It's like they have just like one small anchor that they can be like, okay, I'm going to this to kind of anchor me to reality. And I didn't have that. I didn't have any of that. And I still, um, like leaving Mormonism itself is so existentially traumatic. And so it's like I've been trying to, it's like I got blasted open on psychedelics and got stuck in this sort of like existential threat loop. with nothing that I could anchor to because my whole foundation I had just
Yeah.
lost.
Do you think if it wasn't for the psychedelics, you'd still be a Mormon?
Yes.
And do you wish you were still a Mormon?
No, but that's a hard question to answer because it's been very, very traumatic. But it's definitely easier being Mormon for sure. I mean, I'm sure you can relate when you see people who are just like, man, I wish I could be a little bit more blind to just like life.
Great community support.
Great community support. It's very much like, oh, we're the good guys, all the bad guys are out there, like
Mm.
we're safe in here, and tons of, yeah, just tons of support. But like, I think the main reason why I'm glad I left was because of my kids. Knowing that like, I mean, I just know the amount of like psychological and emotional trauma that I have from growing up in Mormonism, that they won't have to go through that. That's my main thing. Um, but
Yeah.
it's definitely been difficult and
Yeah.
not what I was expecting.
Well, I guess everyone who leaves Mormonism feels, well, not everyone, but a lot feel really kind of isolated and who am I and where's my, and just kind of complete kind of community deficit suddenly.
Yep.
And then to have that amplified by psychedelics is not easy because anyone who has a really tough post-psychedelic kind of situation also feels isolated because like, who can I talk to about this and stuff? Uh,
Absolutely.
and then, and they can feel alienated from new age culture because, they can feel this is vapid or whatever, or they're not hearing what I'm saying and things.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I have so much I could say about that because a lot of the new age plant medicine people are exactly like religious Mormons. They're exactly like them. It's just a different language where it's like they, and this brings me into what I was saying in our email about like how it was hard to find integration coaches who would even acknowledge what had happened because they can become very dogmatic about it,
Hmm.
where it's like, oh, this is the way, just exactly like a religious person will tell you that that's the way,
Hmm.
they're like, this is the way. So if you start talking about the harm, it's like they don't want to hear it because they don't want to look at the whole picture.
Yeah. So what happened? I mean, tell me, you sought kind of some kind of integration support?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one thing I want to add, just before I forget and before I answer that, and just in relation to what you were saying about losing community with Mormonism and like feeling so isolated after you do like have a traumatic psychedelic experience.
Hmm.
Um, Mormonism too is so all-encompassing that it's like, yes, it is a loss of community that makes you feel isolated, but it's like the way that the way that they like indoctrinate you, it's like it was almost like an existential isolation. So it was not only that I couldn't like have community to talk to, but it was like a transpersonal trauma where it was like, oh, I can't like I'm not connected to anything
Yeah.
at all,
Right.
and then they also Mormonism also deeply disconnects you from your own body. And so it was almost like I felt like I never developed the neural pathways to connect to myself. And so it was like, okay, I lost community. I no longer have God, Mormon God, who was fabricated that I was connected to. I don't know how to connect to my body. Therefore, I don't know how to connect to the earth. And so I was just in complete uh,
Yeah.
isolation in every way imaginable.
Yeah.
Um,
Which is interesting because on the psychedelics, you felt disconnected from your body and self. And so that can be a stress response, but it could also be kind of amplifying something that you were feeling as well.
I know. Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's interesting because talking to a lot of people, who work in the psychedelic space, there's different ways that people can have out of body experiences. And sometimes it is healing. Sometimes it's like, oh, this is needed in order to, for whatever reason. And then for other people, it's like dissociative,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
It's like
Yeah.
a stress response, which is more how it was for me.
Mm.
Um, I could talk about this a lot. So just
Yeah, well, so t tell me a little bit about how you sought help and who you sought
yes.
help from.
Yes. So what I will say is the people that I worked with, It's not that they weren't helpful. It's that I could tell that they had, it's almost like I was expecting to be like, oh, okay, I experienced psychedelic trauma. Okay, these people who work in the psychedelics field, they're the ones that I go to take care of me. You know?
Uh-huh.
Like, it's like, oh, you get an injury, you go to a doctor, and it's like
Huh?
they're going to know how to take care of you, right?
Yeah.
And I just found that they didn't really know. And it was like they could help me to an extent. And it was like, oh, maybe they had heard about stories from people of bad trips, or maybe they had some understanding of spiritual emergency or psychosis or whatever it was, but it was all kind of in theory. It was never something that they personally had experienced, or if they had, it was for a very small portion of time. And so it was like they were hearing me, but I could tell that they were not, they were just kind of like, okay, like, well, let's try some grounding, or like,
Mhm.
like, let's just try this or whatever. And it was kind of like they were just like, I don't really know what to do with her. And, and then you couple that with the fact that like I would bump up against their sort of like psychedelic egos sometimes, and
Hmm.
they were very hesitant to acknowledge that I had like PTSD from the experience itself.
Right.
They were,
Yeah. They were
yeah,
trying to frame it as a lesson you need to absorb that's ultimately
yeah,
good for you.
yeah. Either that or like they would blame it all on Mormonism. They'd be like, oh, this wouldn't have happened had you not left Mormonism at the same time. I'm like, even if that's true, the psychedelics were a massive contributing factor. If I just would have left Mormonism and not did psychedelics, I probably wouldn't have. I mean, I know for sure I wouldn't have experienced this state of spiritual emergency.
And kind of the all, yeah, I'm sure it amplified it. Yeah, the kind of
Yeah.
physical issues, the nervous system issues. Yeah. Who did you go to? I mean, you don't have to give me their name, but I'm just curious, how do people find help?
Yeah. So it was a lot of asking around. I mean, that's how I started. And that wasn't very helpful because a lot of people here in Utah are kind of more new age, right? And it's like the people that were giving me medicine, I'm like, well, I don't, I'm like, do you have any suggestions for integration? Because they didn't do integration themselves. And they were just like, try this person or try this person. And it was just a lot of like very new agey kind of people who were like, you know, just not helpful and not trauma informed. And then from there, I
You
eventually,
contacted some of these people, some of the new age people they suggested.
mhm.
And
I I
yeah,
I honestly like I don't even I think I worked with like over 50 practitioners I think in the last 4 years because I think I wrote a list down of all of them that I worked with. I can't even remember them all. Um because I knew I needed help and I was trying to find someone who could help me
yeah.
and they couldn't. You
Five
know?
zero.
Yes.
Wow. And so give me you don't have to give me the total roll call, but give me a sense of,
Let me see if I can
what
find
was
this
the kind
list.
of the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker? What was the kind of Reiki, acupuncture,
Okay, okay.
ancestral trauma, like
It was all of the above. I was willing to try everything because
so what kind of things? Give me some of
I
the
mean, okay, so there's two that I went to who were really good and really helpful. Well, maybe three. Everyone else was kind of just like a one-off type of, so okay, I'm looking at my list. One was there was like a psychotherapist and his wife who work out of England who specialize in Kundalini awakenings.
okay.
So I thought maybe
Try
that's what
that,
was
give it a go.
yeah,
Yeah.
try that and see. And
Mhm.
even then, it's like he was a psychologist and he had awareness, but it was like it wasn't helpful. I don't know.
Mhm.
It was like it felt like it was in theory again.
Mhm.
And then I went to another woman who was based out of Australia, who was very expensive, who helps people through Kundalini awakenings, but she was kind of more yeah, like energy medicine, right? Like she's doing energy, she's feeling and she's like, this is, I don't, she's doing whatever she does. And so you're just kind of sitting there and, it wasn't therapeutic per se.
On Zoom.
Um, on Zoom, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I went to several sort of like intuitives, like
Oh yeah.
psychic.
In
Yeah, yeah,
case it
yeah.
was some kind of something on the astral plane kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah. Fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
what I do.
Yep. And and then
Do
I
they
did
any help?
um I mean it's like
Do they say your soul is in Lemuria or something?
yeah, I had one woman tell me I was being abducted or experimented on by aliens.
Oh,
So, I mean, I guess you never know.
right. Shit. Yeah.
But it's like I tried ancestral medicine, like ancestral healing where they do like I don't know if you've ever
Yep.
done that.
All right. This is
Yeah.
something that happened to your great grandmother or something. And
Yeah, yeah. And then I
shamanism.
shamanism, uh-huh.
Blow smoke on you or
Uh-huh. And some people like that's the thing is like I feel like people who are legitimately like indigenous practitioners, healers, that's like I feel like that's like a real thing. But everybody that I went to was just some like white person who's just like like I'm gonna do a shaman thing on you. I'm like, okay. Um, and then I got really deep into Jungian psychology, which was actually very grounding for me and very helpful.
uh-huh.
So I went to a couple different, I started working with my dreams, which was very helpful. I went to a couple different like Jungian analysts or dream workers. I went to somatic therapy practitioners, which was also helpful. I tried hypnotherapist. I did acupuncture, different types of body work, somatic experiencing, IFS. Um, let's see, just
So
regular
the
talk
things
therapy.
the things that were you said that there were two or maybe three things that were genuinely helpful. So that will
Yes.
be the Jungian, what were they? Which ones?
Yeah, so I found actually both of the ones that were super helpful for me were Jungian practitioners. One is Jungian, she's not a licensed psychologist, but she has a degree in Jungian psychology, and she's actually here in Utah. And she helped me understand. Do you know much about Jungian psychology?
Yeah, fair amount. I mean, a
Yeah.
bit. I'm not a Jungian
Yeah.
therapist, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was helpful for me to kind of like orient. I was so used to orienting to like a God out there and like a thing happening to me. And, like, I don't know, all that stuff that comes with Christianity. And so it was really helpful for me to be like, oh, I need to start relating to my own unconscious. I need to start relating to my somatic experiences.
Right. So like
I need
to framing what you were going through as a kind of inner process.
exactly. And then the other guy I went to, he works exclusively, and he was phenomenal. He honestly was phenomenal. And he works exclusively in psychedelic integration. And he works at like a center where they serve 5-MeO. He's he was so good. And he did a combination of like somatic therapy, connecting to your body plus IFS, so like doing traditional like parts work therapy, plus bringing like this Jungian lens. And he was really, really, really helpful, honestly.
And he was
And
familiar with kind of post-psychedelic problems and things.
uh-huh. Yes, but even him, um, and it's like sometimes I question myself when I say this because I'm like, is there such a thing as a practitioner that like one practitioner that can help you with all your problems? Probably not. It was like, I don't know that that was necessarily a shortcoming of his, or more so just that like healing in general is much more all-encompassing than finding one person who can just be like, make you better,
Right, right.
It was almost like their techniques or their modalities that they usually use um weren't necessarily how do I want to say it's like because of the cult trauma and the Mormon thing, it was like there was a whole other layer of something happening for me where it was like they'd be like, okay, we need to get you connected to your body, but because I had this whole other thing happening with Mormonism, it was like
Mm,
I couldn't even like I don't they're like that's not happening, and they didn't know, they weren't familiar with that, right? Like they
right,
weren't familiar
right.
with that level of um disconnection or like
Interesting.
yeah.
That it is like a kind of subset that one comes across within people who have post-psychedelic difficulties. There is a kind of subset of people from kind of cult childhoods. I
I
think
have noticed that.
I guess it's because of trauma, and then that can I think trauma can lead to spiritual experiences being harder and more likely to be spiritual emergencies or
Yeah.
So, and I guess it's, trauma and the boundary issues and attachment issues, and that can make it harder to come back to your normal ego after an ecstatic experience.
Yes, because in my experience, like your ego structure is like your ego structure and how connected you, I guess I should say, how your ego structure developed is like the number one most important factor in your ability to come back after a psychedelic experience. Because, my ego structure was literally built around Mormonism.
Yeah,
And once that left, it was like there was no self, you
right.
know?
Yeah, you
Yeah,
didn't have a stable base.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's been the thing that has eventually gotten me closer and closer and closer to recovery
Mm.
is developing a stable sense of self.
Yeah. I had a friend who was ex-Mormon. She got really into Stoicism, and Stoicism helped me after, with my PTSD after a psychedelic trip, because it's about establishing boundaries. What's in my control, what isn't. And I had very confused boundaries and would worry a lot about things beyond my control and that kind of thing. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
What about, did you go to I think you probably went to some doctors as well and had like medical tests. Did that turn up anything?
I spent so much money because I didn't have health insurance at the time either because I'm self-employed. So I spent so much money going to the doctor. The only
How
thing
much do
that
you think
turned
you
up,
spent all in all out of interest on everything?
oh, I mean, I would bet you I spent on all my therapy, all my practitioners, all my doctor's appointments. I bet you I spent over $30,000,
Yeah.
which is crazy to me. It's like this is a conversation I was having recently where it's like it's so easy to get like high doses of psychedelics, but then, you know, integration or trauma therapy or whatever support you might need afterwards is like hundreds of dollars an hour. And
Yeah.
people, yeah, people don't have the resources for that. It's like,
Were you able to work during this time?
so I couldn't work for probably 6 months. I have a pretty established career that I had a lot of residual income. I have like an online subscription program. So I had a lot of residual income coming in, which supported me through all of that. But, I thought many times where I'm like, it feels almost like you have to be in some position of privilege or to even engage in this process. You know what I mean?
I 100% know what you mean. I wrote something very similar. I wrote an op-ed in the New York Times saying this is being promoted by billionaires, but they can afford 6 months off work
Yep,
and kind of constant therapy if it goes wrong. But
exactly.
ordinary people, can't necessarily.
I completely agree. And I thought that so many times. I'm like, this is not sustainable. Like, if I didn't have a substantial source of, I should say, substantially enough source of residual income.
Mm,
And even then, it's like I live in a safe area. I have support from my family still.
yeah.
If anything would have gone wrong, people would have come to, you know what I mean? Like I could have
Yeah.
moved in with
So
parents.
you had some advantages, like there are people taking psychedelics without that,
Exactly.
without residual income, probably with, young children as well, and all of the rest of it. So yeah.
Yeah. And I have 3 kids.
Yeah.
And I'm a single mom. So that was one piece that it was like, oh, this is not, like a lot of the people that I worked with as integration coaches or therapists, it was like either they didn't have kids or their kids were grown, and so they're trying to, tell
Because it's like
me,
a retirement thing for a lot of people.
yeah, yeah.
So
So
I'm
they're
gonna,
like
what
trying
are
to
you, what are you
tell
going to
me,
do in your retirement? I'm going to become a wizard.
yes. So they're like, oh, you just need more self-care. And I'm like, okay, let me just
Yeah.
do that real quick. Let
Yeah.
me just
Yeah.
find
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Exactly. That's so
time.
true.
Yeah. So anyway, was there a
Well,
question?
so I mean, I wondered about the doctors, whether I'm
Mhm.
just curious. did the test turn anything up? I'm curious about things like biomarkers, or
Yeah.
does this show up in medical tests or any particular issues?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So the functional seizures, that was a medically diagnosed thing. Um, I had MRIs, I had heart scans, I had a lot of blood work done. I had some gut panels done. The gut dysbiosis that also has shown up. And that's something that's still a lingering symptom that I have. Like I can't quite get my gut to recover from just like all that stress. Um, I'm trying to think if there was anything else that was like actually diagnosed or showing
Gut,
up.
gut dysbiosis,
Yeah,
which is
just like,
like stressed gut.
yeah, I mean, it could be caused by a lot of things. It's essentially just a term for like a gut imbalance.
Right.
It's like my good bacteria are low and my bad bacteria are high, and it just comes from, I mean, it can come from all sorts of things.
And
Um,
the functional seizures, did they give you medication for that?
they tried to, but I mean, one of the things that's come of my whole experience is that I'm like petrified to put like anything in my body, which is why I lost so much weight. So they tried to give me medication, and I was like, no, I'm not taking that.
That's gone away anyway, the seizures.
I haven't had one for a long time. I will have moments that feel like I'm going to, but I haven't had, I mean, I'm much more regulated than I was. So it's been probably, I would say at least 8 months.
Uh-huh. Um, and how's it now? What's the latest?
The lingering symptoms. So yeah, this is like the final pieces I feel like of my recovery that I've really had to figure out on my own, that I feel like this is kind of where like the integration coaches, their expertise kind of ends. Um, and it's like I have these, it's like I can't quite get my nervous system regulated. And on top of that, so it's like I'm constantly in fight or flight still. And on top of that, I have very irrational phobias that are related to my body symptoms and how all of that just like I don't know. So it's like it's almost like in the what I'm picturing is that like some wires just got crossed and they just haven't been able to like resolve themselves. So it's like I have really irrational phobias about like I mean I have two eating disorders that I feel like I can't um quite get under control, which is basically like a fear. It goes back to the same thing. It's a fear of putting something in my body. I'm terrified to the point of being incredibly irrational that I'm going to put something in my body that's going to harm me. So it's like I can't. I struggle with a lot of foods still. I have a hard time. I don't ever take medication like at all. Um, but even something like, I got a bee sting a couple days ago, and I'm not allergic to bees, but I had a full panic attack because I was just like, oh, I'm gonna die. Weird things like that.
Mm,
Um, I've had a lot of just very bizarre triggers like that are like will send me into a panic attack that are incredibly irrational. And it's like I know they're irrational, but I can't I
mm.
can't quite, get myself
Yeah.
out of it.
Yeah.
So, and then of course, I mean, I've all of this dysregulation has just caused a lot of health issues, and it's just like, chronic inflammation and like the chronic gut stuff and struggling to eat, struggling to sleep, it just kind of makes you feel like garbage all the time.
hmm What's what have you found things that are still kind of helping? Any daily things or
Yeah, I mean, I finally gotten to the point where, and this brings me back to the whole like, I feel like healing, it's so all encompassing because it's somatic, but it's like relational and it's transpersonal. It requires a certain degree of trust. Like you can't heal if you don't have a certain degree of trust in something. And I've gotten, even if it's just yourself. And so I've finally gotten to the point where it's like, okay, I'm starting to trust my own system. I'm starting to trust my own perceptions. I'm starting to trust like a sense of consensus reality again, and that is what is allowing all of these modalities to finally like stick. So it's like, before I would spend a long time in nature and I would just it wouldn't do anything. And now I can go outside and I can feel like, oh, this is regulating my nervous system. I can feel it. Um, I'm trying to think what else. Relational. I mean, so much of it is relational. At least it has been for me. I mean, I'm a huge proponent and believer of like co-regulation, and I couldn't because I had experienced such massive betrayal with Mormonism, and my entire community was Mormon. I couldn't co-regulate with anyone, and now I'm finally getting to the point where my system is trusting enough again people that I can be like, okay, this person feels safe. And it's taken 4 years for my own body to just allow that sort of thing in. Um, and of course, things like it's like there's certain types of therapies that help. I feel like IFS helped me a lot, but also the therapist I work with, she does process work. I don't know if you're familiar. It's like a branch off of Jungian psychology, but it's a very body based, so it's like a very somatic type of therapy. So getting connected to my body, having safe people again. Um, a lot of hands-on body work has also been very helpful for me. Like people who are doing acupuncture or like massage or cranial sacral or things like yoga but that's been tricky because I've been so afraid of my own body. I'm like afraid to use it, or I've been afraid to use it.
Hmm.
It's just been a mess.
Well, you've been walking through it. I mean,
Yeah.
well done for walking through it. And it's hard, like, to leave Mormonism is hard. And then this on top, of course. And then, you got three kids at the same time. So I think, you know, I'm sure people like reading this or, will be thinking, well done you for having dealt with all of that. That's a serious portion of life
Yeah.
you got served.
Yeah.
So well done, for walking through that.
Thanks. I hope I can get to the point where at least I'm not sick all the time, where I can at least be regulated enough that my body can kind of like recover. I think I will. It might just take another 5 years, which you obviously can relate.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of keep going step by step, and then you kind of look back and at some points, and but yeah, I had a very unusually long recovery. I mean, because it happened to me when I was 18, when I was, and I suppose maybe it's triggered some genetic stuff, I don't know, but um in terms of trust issues, like I wasn't capable of a relationship in my 20s, and only really in my 30s was able to, and then only quite short term. And I got married like last month, so it's like, I'm 47, so.
Yeah.
But I think that's also my personality, like there's a little bit
Yeah.
in that mix. So, but there's no, who knows? I just interviewed someone and they were a pastor at a mega church, and
Mm.
they lost their faith, got into mushrooms, had some good times, but then had a big trip and felt they were in hell and were very shaken up afterwards. But kind of cleared up after 3, 4 months, and they've found their way to Episcopalianism and like less evangelical type of Christianity. But it's unpredictable, so you just can't tell. You just got to you go day by day, and then who knows?
I
Uh,
know.
yeah,
I know.
and
I agree.
maybe there's some things to that you can enjoy along the way, and kind of moments and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and maybe, you know, in a month it's a little better than a month before, and that kind of thing.
Yeah. And that's how it's been. I mean, and that it makes sense that the process would be that way, right? That it's just a little bit at a time. Um, and a big part of like why I went to so many practitioners was because like, well, I mean, first of all, I grew up under a rock. So I was very curious. And I was like seeking help, but I was also like, what are all these people doing?
You
And I
grew up
wanted to
under a
know.
rock.
I did. I literally did. Yeah. And it feels like have you ever seen Elf when he like goes into the city for the
Yeah,
first time? It's like how it felt. It's how it felt. And I was just like,
right.
you know, and so
You're
I
an
was like,
acupuncturist. You
yeah.
put needles in people. Wow. Okay.
That's how it was. So I was like very, very curious. I just was like, what's ancestral healing? Like, what's this? What's Reiki? Like, what's this thing you're doing? And so
Yeah.
I was like, experimenting. But also I knew that there was probably someone out there who could, or people who could help me in some way. And it's like the ones that were actually helpful did, they got me just like one step further along in the process, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, keep in touch. Maybe come on, come to the peer support if you can, but just keep in touch in terms of what helps as well if you find other things too. And I think I appreciate you sharing your story. And I think others will as well. It's people say it's really helpful to kind of just hear other people's stories and stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
That's what I found on social media. People are always like, "Oh, thank you." Like it just helps people feel seen.
so have you been talking about it then? And like, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I primarily was focusing on ex-Mormon like deconstruction, but just recently I've really opened up about the psychedelic stuff, and it's been really good. Yeah.
And is that your business? Are you in kind of media or in content or
No, I mean my
yeah,
career.
subscription kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I'm a hairstylist. It's just completely not even related. I educate, and so people pay me to learn how to do hair. It's
Right.
like totally related, but I do have like a coaching practice that I've done with ex-Mormons, but I'm picking it back up more now and hoping to help work more in the psychedelic integration space because that's really like what I'm passionate about.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Very good. Well, yeah, send me any kind of links you want me to share as well.
Okay.
And yeah, thank you very much, Stephanie.
Yeah.
Any other questions for me? Uh, let me I can